Okay, we're good. Good to go.
Morena, councillors, staff, welcome to this meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting. I'd like to also say a very special welcome to any members of the public who may be live streaming in, and a very special welcome to Paul Blair, Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand, who is going to wow us with his presentation on the future of infrastructure in New Zealand. Councillors, just the reminder that if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Unfortunately, I have to keep going up and down because I can only see 6 of you at one time. So a little bit of patience in terms of my technological incompetence would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so let's just start the meeting, please. There are no apologies. There is no public forum. There's no acceptance of late items, except we have received this morning 2 additional items. They are both to do with the item 8.2 on the agenda regarding the Smart Growth Leadership Group paper. One outlines some changes that have been made following recent discussions on the MOU in particular. And when we get to the item, I will ask Namuta if she could just run us through those, because I'm sure probably you might not have had time to digest it fully. So we'll just take our time to work through that when we get to that particular matter. The other presentation that you received this morning was one that was given to the Urban Development or the Smart Growth Leadership Group in confidence, and it outlines the background thinking to the Urban Development Partnership. It was given in confidential, and so if we're to have any discussion or consideration of that, we'll need to do so with the public excluded. So are you all still with me? Excellent. Okay. So do we have any declarations of conflicts of interest? There are none. I will now move to the previous minutes of this committee's minutes dated the 18th of February, and I will move that they are a true and correct record. Do I have?
I will second.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Are there any matters arising? I have one, and that is in relation to the item 8.8 of the minutes in terms of waste opportunities. And I note that we as a council had agreed that we will consider enhanced roles in integrated waste management, and I wonder if staff might be good enough to perhaps just give us an update on where that matter might have proceeded to. Namuta or somebody? Somebody?
I can help, Madam Chair, possibly. Namuta seems to be not responding, but I understood that councillors that this work is not considered to be an essential service under COVID. So at this stage, no further work has been done to progress that. So it's still in there as an item, but it's just not the time for us to be focusing on that right now.
Thanks, Chris. I wonder if we can just have that, just make sure we keep that on our work program going forward so we don't lose sight of it. It would be appreciated.
Yep.
So I'm going to move receipt of those minutes, seconded by Councillor Rose. Any further debate or discussion?
Paula, could I just ask that point about no further work on regional waste management, does that preclude staff including a paper on to our annual plan on that? I just want to make sure that if we are to take a bigger role, that some thinking has been undertaken as to what that might need to be resourced by. So I just want an assurance that, in fact, that some allowance will have been made in the annual plan if this is going to be the way forward.
Thanks, Councillor Nees. Could we have a comment on that from you, Chris?
Yeah, yes, that Councillor Innes, thank you. That's exactly where I thought the topic would come up again, is probably in the strategic session when we start talking later on about post-COVID. What does the council think are the priorities now that the world has changed a little for us?
Thank you. So the motion needs to be now unanimously accepted. Is that the case? Yes, I don't see any dissent. So moved. Okay, without further ado, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Paul Blair, the Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand. Paul's relatively new in the position, I believe, Paul, about 9 months or so, but comes from a very extensive background in international and national banking, and is passionate about making sure that Infrastructure New Zealand is the leading thinker in the space around innovative ways for New Zealand to progress infrastructure development, particularly along sustainable development lines. So Paul, without further ado, thank you very much, and we look forward to your presentation, and there will be ample opportunities for questions after you've finished. So very warm welcome, thank you.
Well, Morena to everyone, kia ora koutou, and thank you very much for that warm welcome, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, we'd like to be known as thinkers, but also hopefully as people that help the doing. So we do a lot of talking in New Zealand, and COVID's given us an opportunity to actually get on and fix some problems that have been long-standing, but also see some opportunities. So we're really keen to work with you on that. I will run through a presentation quite quickly as a frame for what we've been doing in this area, but as Councillor Thompson said, I think the value for me and also for you is probably more in the Q&A. So we'll get through that quickly. I'll just put up this presentation, which I understand may have been shared with you. But the primary piece of thinking that we've done in this area is something that we call building regions. And it's a sort of a comprehensive system-wide view of what we might need to do in order to align better our local and central government, to give them the tools and the funding and all of those other enablers that enable us to get on and build a better New Zealand, which is why I think you sit around the council table. So if I can move this on somehow, here we go. So these are our members. We've got about 140 members, including all of the growth councils, but you'll see over here that we've got great breadth in the sectors that we represent. So we very much try to be the glue that brings together conversations and aims for collaboration, because as you all know, there are massive complexities in our system, and the lawyers may have a view that doesn't align with the engineers, that doesn't align with the funders, and so on and so forth. So what we try and be is we try and pick the best of everything that we hear, bring people together around a common cause and vision. This is our vision, which is that all New Zealanders should enjoy the benefits of world-class infrastructure. We take delegates on overseas tours. We were unlucky enough to have 45 people, including representatives from Tauranga City Council, lined up to come with us to Dublin and Denmark. It was going to be 4 days after level 4 lockdown, so we're not there. But these 5 key pillars we've seen consistently around the globe. It's backed up by academic research. The first and most important of these 5, and you need all 5, is a vision, a long-term vision for where we're going. That needs to be very, very well led, and our governance needs to come together around that vision. The second piece is a 30+ year integrated plan so that all parties are rowing the waka together in the right direction. The third, which is where we sometimes fall down in New Zealand, is we often start this circle at number 3. We go, what funding do we have? With funding as our income, and finance is the sources of debt or equity. So funding being the income that you get from your stake in the ports and other methods. In New Zealand, we have set ourselves up, because of past failings in thinking big and other reasons, to say how much money have we got, and we trade off the outcomes. We don't start off at number 1, which is what are the outcomes we need to achieve, and what might we innovatively achieve that. Really important point. Number 4 is laws and regulation, which again, we tend to go far too hard towards laws and regulation and stifle the ability for people to delegate authority to close to our communities. Culture and incentives are actually a massive part of that. We've just heard about fast tracking the RMA. That is a piece of legislation. If we don't address the underlying incentives and the risks that come through that legislation and part of the wider system, then in my view, we won't get the optimal outcome. And the final one, there are people all the way through all this. This is for people and by people. But number 5 is really about how we do it. So how do we deliver? Do we have the capacity in the industry? Do we have the capability in the industry? And this is where innovation tends to come in. So if you think of that as, you could think of this as the Bay of Plenty wider region, you could think of it as a sector like water, or you could think of it as a country like New Zealand. In order for us to have world-class outcomes, we need to have all 5 of these pillars, but it starts with leadership and a vision. From that, we can achieve great things. This is our 5 policy priorities. I've got a link there that you can look at, but what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the second pillar. So this is the Building Regions proposal. I'll describe it all the way through. So that's our policy area. We only keep 5 because I've only got 5 fingers. And we have these themes or behaviours that run all the way through. Climate resilience. Future-proofing our industry is about diverse voices, but it's also about best practice. It's about 30-year pipelines. It's about taking all of the best practice that we possibly can and putting it through all sectors. For our, we've got community-driven infrastructure here. I hesitated for those Māori members of your council over having iwi as the theme here. I've actually chosen to go higher to community-driven infrastructure, not because of any wish to not downplay the role of iwi in governance, but if we go back to our 5 pillars previously, at that governance level, in my view, we have already agreed to co-governance, and that needs to be taken into account. But a core theme is that when I talk to people in communities, they feel as if infrastructure is being done to them, not with them or for them. And you know, we're one of the most centralised systems in the world. It's over 90-10, as we'll talk about. Communities feel that they are disempowered, and this is not the way that we started out this country. Innovation, and then collaboration in everything. We think that the answer to a complex problem in a complex world is that people need to get together, and it's quite astonishing, really, that we've got only sort of 2 key layers of government. I know you have a regional government. We only have 2 layers of government, but we're set up often to compete rather than collaborate. So this diagram here is our desktop research. It shows on the left-hand side who owns infrastructure. Now this is our best attempt from what we could get, but it shows roughly, you'll see that central government has about 42% of the infrastructure in New Zealand. Local government has about 38% of the infrastructure in New Zealand, and the remaining roughly 20% is in the private sector. The key issue is, as we go to the right-hand side, is that central government, as you well know, has about 90% of the revenue pool that's available to government. So I just want to pause on that. We have a 90-10 revenue split, and we roughly have 50-50 between our 2 forms of local government. That revenue model misalignment, the fact that the revenue model for local government is about earning back costs rather than benefiting from upside, is one of the critical issues that we've got to face. The other issue we've got to face is that when we go into the resource space, why on earth a local government would issue a consent, other than for the fact that you guys all work for the greater good of the communities, when you carry all of the downside risk through the Building Act or through joint and several as well. So, you know, at the very highest level, this is a really unusual system where we have an unequal relationship between central and local government, the answer to which is a new partnership. So we've had a desktop review at what we think the traffic light state of various sectors are. The key thing I want to point out there is that the private sector tends to be doing pretty well. That's the place where it's regulated. It has independent governance. It has an independent revenue stream, whether that's through economic regulation or through market regulation. And it's doing pretty well. So there is a question here on the Treasury website. We talk about, you know, private sector first, and I'm not here to advocate private sector first, but my question is, do we have enough of it? And is it being used to drive innovation? And the other thing is that, as I said before, we've got to pick up the performance of our infrastructure because this is for our communities. Last year, we took our annual conference of 720 delegates to Rotorua, That was all about building regions. So we want to hold it in the regions and show this up. So we talk about city deals or regional deals. I'll talk about this in our building regions proposal, but this is the concept which is used in many parts of the world. There are 13 of these deals in Australia alone, where the central or federal government captures taxes and then it agrees a partnership deal with a local region, generally around a spatial plan. They agree common objectives, and some of that central taxation is recycled into a local area or a region for common objectives. Very, very normal arrangement, not here in New Zealand yet. 98% support for that. 93% support for increased local government powers as well. I also support increased powers for local government, but I'm practical enough to talk through in this that I think there are difficulties in doing that in New Zealand. So misalignment, I've talked about starting from balancing the books, not what are the outcomes. Growth goes to central, costs go local, vice versa. Our revenue disparity, subscale, particularly in the smaller local authority areas, a bit of a city versus country divide, and short-term planning. You know, we really need to be looking longer term at planning. I know we have, you know, volatile environments, but it's sort of ironic that local and regional government are doing sort of 30-year plans and central government has no land use and no central plan for New Zealand. Overall, lack of oversight and accountability. Central government marks its own homework on this. We don't have, what I would love to see is that we set a series of outcomes for New Zealand which are unequivocal and international and ambitious. An example could be that we want to be in the top quartile for health outcomes, and we just faced a pandemic on that. I did a back of envelope. I think we have 3 ICU beds per 100,000 people in New Zealand. Italy has 8.8, 16.2 is the OECD average, and Germany has 35. If we had some benchmarking about what we need to have as opposed to what we are able to fund, I think that is the sort of system that would lead to better class outcomes. And I also think that the 3-year election cycles and the fact that local government is sort of off cycle there with the federal election does not help us either. So moving swiftly on, this slide is a controversial one, but it comes from local government. This is the difficulty, is that over decades, we, the voters of New Zealand, have put more of what the Productivity Commission calls unfunded mandates on local and regional government. And the consequence of that, and the risk and reward that I mentioned before, is that local government is not well trusted. And again, it's chicken and egg here. So I'm a supporter of localism. I simply do not believe, and I've been very direct with Malcolm Alexander, that we're going to get 1,400 self-taxing cantons, as the New Zealand Initiative would say. I think that there's a real issue, and I know that a number of you are movers and shakers on the local government scene. I presented to the major metros group, and I think that the answer needs to be a halfway house. We need to start building trust, as you do in any partnership. And then there is the opportunity to move to further localism as trust is built. So this is how we would suggest that we do this. We would look at a framework agreement that gives multi-year revenues to local regions. So it would be grant revenue. So it's the same as you receiving rates or DCs or income from the port. So you'd receive multi-year revenue. It would be in terms of a joined up integrated spatial plan. A critical one that unlocks it is, I would suggest that the capability of that wider region be measured by an independent tool, which is called the Investor Confidence Rating. I'll come back to that later. And that is I think the independent language that measures success. And that is really critical for a partnership. I talked about alignment of local, regional, and national goals. I've talked about scale. Water is going to be scaled up. I think transport is highly likely to be scaled up. I know that these are existential threats to the current model of local and regional government. I have been a massive advocate as recently as today on the radio and in LinkedIn and anything else that I can about the need for local democracy. But we've got to move out of our trenches and move towards each other on this. And later on, I think that that's when we can unleash some innovation in how we work. So this, the report is on our website. This is an example. There was I think an example at 6 regions, 10 regions, 18 regions, you know, follow your rugby team, whatever you like. I think the key that we suggest is that it be a minimum size of population in order to generate scale, and that it be self-determined by those regions. So if we look at Coromandel, there's a very obvious, do we want to be part of a wider Waikato or do we want to be part of a wider bay? That should be community determined, and to some extent it should help balance the town versus country split as well. I really want to stress that this is not about amalgamation. This does not change any local government arrangements. So there is still a local council that is 3,500 people deep in the middle of the mid-Canterbury, and they still have exactly the same mandate. But what we're talking about is scaling up some functions to the regional level. This is a worked example, and I've chosen the Waikato for no good reason other than it's not Auckland, which is where I'm calling to you from, and we all hate Jaffas, despite the fact my grandparents were born in Tauranga, and I've been there every year of my life, and I love Tauranga. So I'm talking about a Waikato regional partnership, say a 2050 vision. I'm talking about the key Crown agencies, so Minivaid, Kāinga Ora, NZTA, etc., coming to the table. I'm talking about representatives of local iwi, and I'll come to how that might work where there are multiple iwi in the region as well, and representatives of the mayors or the CEOs of those regions come together. So we figure out how we're going to co-govern together. The second thing is we need a delivery agent. Over the hill, the Waikato Local Authority Shared Services arrangements are starting to work that out. So they're moving from 12 or 13 councils into one delivery agent, and that enables real scale. Even little old Northland is doing this in transport and finding massive benefits in cross-training and ability to join up. This is where the magic is at the moment. As an ex-banker, money has never, ever been cheaper. So the Crown can borrow money at nothing, basically. The key for councils and for regional councils is that money is set for 10 years. It's set on a formula. It might be set on a formula of that relates to your existing contribution to national GDP and some balancing figures. And those balancing figures would be to say that those regions that need a helping hand, those ones that are in the Provincial Growth Fund, for example, get a little bit more. Others might get a little bit less. I know that in Australia, that formula is argued about every bloody year, but I think we need to have a formula and a framework that is fair and transparent. The critical and magical bit about this is every dollar that comes in can be leveraged 2.5 times. And as of this morning, I know that LGFA is looking at that being leveraged up to 3 times. So using housing, because this is at the time that I was looking at it, and it was pre-COVID, it was around about $50,000 of infrastructure. This is pipes and roads locally that need to go in per home lot. I've tested this with Tauranga City Council, and it's broadly correct, plus or minus. So that $350 million that's gone to work funds 7,000 home lots. The new infrastructure funding and financing and Kāinga Ora urban development powers might help with this assist delivery. But then the critical thing is that this is where the private sector comes in. And the private sector, even for a reasonably modest 150 square metre home and a very modest 2,000 square metre, generates a total of almost $2.5 billion worth of economic activity. And you guys will be well aware that the beneficiary of that economic activity is in Wellington, and it's a cost recovery locally. So look, the Crown gets back almost 3.5 times its revenue just on GST alone. And since I did this, and I did it deliberately high level, and I ignored personal and corporate taxes, the critical thing right here, right now, that the government is facing into is I've ignored jobs, right? So this creates jobs. The other critical thing is that of the 40 billion of construction that happens in New Zealand every year, only 20% comes from government as client, 80% comes from the private sector. So with even the best will in the world, the Crown does not have the balance sheet nor the capability, and it'd be horrifying if they were to try and replace that 80%. They could certainly boost it in the short term, But this is about enabling, not about the Crown taking over. The final one I want to rest on is this investor confidence rating. So this is a rating tool in the same way that Standard & Poor's has a debt rating tool. And what it does is it looks at how well, for example, the Waikato region does spatial planning, does investment cases, does asset management, and basically what Bill English used to call the best practice tools for managing public money. And it gives you a rating. So NZTA went through some pretty well known issues, and it had a B rating, which gave it a certain amount of delegated authority from the Crown. It dropped to a C through those problems. Now, so imagine if the Waikato Regional Partnership had a C. What you can do to Grant Robertson is go, give me $1 grant, I'll leverage it 2.5 times or 3 times, and I'll invest it at least as well as your agency. Furthermore, I'll stop fighting with your agencies and we'll start joining up and saving money together. Furthermore, I'll deliver you happy voters in the regions. Something like this was done in Australia, and it got to voters having a 70% approval rating for the then Premier of New South Wales. It can work politically. It can work for the Crown. It can work locally. Everyone's just got to give a little, particularly the Crown. Oh, and sorry, social procurement is my final point on that. 10-year procurement, we've done a study that shows between 5 and 15% of the capital value of procurement can be saved in capital cost, but you can also generate local jobs, apprenticeships, they can be generated towards vulnerable communities, and you can support local SMEs and procurement in the regions. So that's the way that you bridge from, this is not all about Fletcher's getting contracts and the SMEs getting nothing. This is about bringing on local and scaling up capability in these regions. That's how that would work. So really it's about joining the needs of the community at the regional level where scale is needed. And in particular, I think that's in water and transport, because people go across council boundaries, right? That's where we can have a win-win, provided we agree on the things that matter to us most. And they should all align with national development needs. And these are not economic, these are economic, social, cultural, and environmental. So that's where I'm going to stop yelling at you, and I'll open up for any questions that you might like to throw my way.
Thank you very much, Paul. Absolutely fascinating. Yvonne, I've just receiving some text telling me that people can't watch the live stream. Apparently it's bouncing all over the show. So I just wonder if someone might be able to look at that, please, because clearly there's quite a bit of interest in Paul's presentation. So councillors, bear with me as we go through your questions. So starting with Councillor David Love. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Paula. Paul, good morning to you. I've read your report on which your presentation today is based. I note it was dated August last year. It really is the most far-reaching report I think I've read since I've been on council. It just doesn't cover infrastructure, it covers the whole system of governance in New Zealand and tells us exactly what is wrong and puts forward some very positive suggestions for how we should do things better. I like many of the things. One of them in particular is your idea of regionalisation. And also the other thing which I think is important, which you cover, is the idea that the 3-year triennium for government and for local government is in fact totally ineffective in helping us achieve what we want to achieve, and we should really be considering that. All of your suggestions are so good that it really deserves the widest possible publicity. The problem is, of course, it's going to need take up by central government if we are going to achieve the outcomes which I believe are really necessary for New Zealand. And I know that the government is currently totally diverted, and rightly so, by COVID. But can you tell us what take up your initiative is having at the central government level? And is there interest in the wide scale recommendations which you're making?
So thank you, Councillor. We've been very vocal on this, not just with the current government, but also with any opposition party and the media. On our website, we've released a couple of media releases which publish our letters directly to Minister Robertson, Jones and Twyford. You'll see those there. So look, the angle that we're coming at is that this is no more than current government policy. So there is an urban growth agenda in which 4 of the 5 key things on that urban growth agenda have been done. The 5th is called urban growth partnerships. What we're saying to the Crown is here is a pathway. Please amend it, change it, deal with it as you want, but take the substance of this. I know that Minister Twyford is extremely on board with this, but he needs to convince Robertson, I suppose, and Ardern that this is the way to go. I think that there's a win-win here, and we're just providing some ideas on a middle ground. What concerns me is that we need to address this sort of strategic framework in order to get New Zealand up and going. We're only coming out, probably not even out of level 1 at the moment in terms of the Horizon 1. We're really moving into Horizon 2 with the May budget. The big strategic thinking is sort of going to happen between now and September. And this is where I think, we need thought leaders to jump in and progress this. We're also thinking that this is the environment for trials. And so I've been pushing with the Richard Briggses of the world and Stephen Towns and the Jim Bolts and anyone else who'll listen, that this is the time, and I know that it's being done here in the Bay, for the type of reverse inquiry to come, the olive branch to come from councils and regions, but not to come as an ask. It comes with strings, it comes with co-investment, it comes with changes in behaviour. And so it needs to come with gives, not, so it's hand ups, not handouts. And I know that Tauranga has been doing a lot in this space with smart growth and other things. But I do think this is the time when we can experiment, because the political environment enables some risk taking and some experiments. We just need some leaders to take the mettle and get on with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Nees and then Councillor Crosby and then Councillor Eatey.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting. I've got 2 questions. One is the examples that you talked about in Australia. They've got state government as well as national government, and I'd like to understand the different contributions that each of those provide and how that would potentially work in New Zealand. And the other one is, I was delighted to see that you've got climate resilience as one of your themes. And I'm conscious that the Climate Change Commission came back out with a series of principles for development post-COVID. And that was very much about everything you do, make it environmentally sustainable, take account of climate change, etc. And I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you. So on the second one, I've been in contact with the Climate Commission. We fully agree with them. And in particular for the environmental stimulus part of May, we put a media release out that had 6 principles. You'll find a lot of overlap with those and what the Climate Commission was saying. A barista can hold a shovel and plant a tree, but they're a bit hard to do a wind turbine. So, we need to be practical and immediate in terms of jobs and economy. And I think the green economy is a big part of that. The second one, Australia, yes, has 3 benighted levels of government. Over there, the states are the big infrastructure providers. The federal government stays out of it, and local councils are really important in their communities. So it's the states that do the heavy lifting. If I look at that here, regional council, and you guys are a bit different because you have that significant asset in the port and it's done well. But regional councils here have, some wider transport, ability. They have some wider environmental ability, but really they're not the engine rooms of regional infrastructure. What I'm suggesting is that it's not regional government, it's a regional collaboration. And I'm being deliberately vague on the form because I think that otherwise we'll have lawyers crawling all over this. This could happen tomorrow through well-meaning people getting together and calling it a thing. So, ATAP on steroids, smart growth on steroids, the Northern Transport Alignment on steroids, the Waikato Local Authority Shared Services. There's no substitute for leaders getting together, changing behaviours and working together. That's what I'm talking about.
Wow. Councillor Crosby.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Very good.
First of all, just a declaration on the Vice President of Local Government New Zealand, and had a long association with Infrastructure New Zealand, and had the pleasure of speaking at some of your conferences. And at a conference a couple of years ago in Auckland, the concept of the Infrastructure Commission was launched by Minister Jones and immediately supported by the Leader of the Opposition, Simon Bridges, which was very, very good to have that kind of collaboration. My question is around that, and I know your predecessor is on the commission, is how do you see the linkage of the commission's work at a national level and right through to delivery on the ground? I'm not sure if you're at that conference, but we also had speakers, one from the UK and one from Australia, that gave their version on how the commissions worked, and it was from one extreme, virtually bring back the Ministry of Works right through to just developing a pipeline of work, etc. So I'd be very interested in your view and your organisation's view on how that commission should move forward and its role and function. Thank you.
In my declaration, as I presented to the Local Government New Zealand Metros group, which is up on our website, I'm looking forward to, my declaration is I'm looking forward to a change of leadership at Local Government New Zealand. I think that, you know, I presented to the major metros group there that represent almost 70% of Local Government New Zealand's members, and they are broadly on board with ideas such as this. The difficulty, Stuart, you may face is that my perception is that we're still run by the lowest common denominator and the loudest and squeakiest voices. And I think that we have a real opportunity, and I apologise for saying this, but I think we have a real opportunity to figure out through this, we've figured out what is good for society as a whole. You know, our Resource Management Act issues as well is about the squeaky wheels dominating over the needs of the many. I just don't think we have the ability as a country to afford that anymore. So apologies there, but I think there's a real opportunity for local government to meet the needs of all of its members, but it needs to pivot its model. So sorry, I'll answer on the other one. The Infrastructure Commission, we lobbied for that consistently and long. I was at that conference. I was on the board for 4 years prior to becoming CEO. I'm a great fan of it. The best model we've seen is probably the Scottish Futures Trust. It was very deliberately not called the Scottish Treasury, and it operated as half public sector people, half private sector people, and they effectively operated as an Ernst & Young that was free to any department, to any agency, or to any local authority. They would come in and they would stand alongside that department or that local authority in getting a major or a complex project up and done. And they had that magical thing that we used to have in the bank of funny money. So they would create value and they'd be allocated and rewarded based on funny money. All of the asset management would sit there with the underlying agency or the region. That's the model that we envisaged for the Commission, plus its role in the 30-year strategy. We're massive supporters of the need for a commission. We're massive supporters of the need for central government to have advice on a 30-year horizon that at least matches what's happening in local government. You know, central government has to have a view on what's most important for the needs of its community. So we're big supporters. We work with them day in and day out. Unfortunate timing with COVID. You know, they only got established in October. They still don't have a permanent CEO. And in fact, their current CEO is not quite there at the moment. But yeah, we're major supporters of the Commission.
Thank you. Councillor Eatey and then Councillor Brunning.
Kia ora, Paul.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. My question is around social procurement. Just wondering what your membership, in particular the construction sector, what is their view of social procurement at this point? Because the feedback I've had from the Southern Initiative out of Auckland City Council, and they've been driving this for about half a decade, is that contractors will find any sort of way to try to mitigate any impact on their bottom line. So I'm just interested how you're finding this conversation around social and sustainable procurement with your membership.
We're being driven by our members actually towards social procurement because they see it as the right thing to do. I will acknowledge that there are some that do it considerably better than others. Part of the other problem is that we've set up our systems to be driven by the economic, where the other three well-beings are nice to haves, fluffy, and then ignored for the cheapest price. And that's a systemic problem in the construction sector, which has been recognised. We did it through our procurement survey. We wrote a report on the efficiency and the productivity of the construction sector that ultimately led to the construction sector accord being created. If you were to go to the construction sector website and have a look there are some core principles and values that are coming through there. I've joined that accord. Social procurement is at the heart of it. All of our media releases are absolutely advocating for social procurement. It is the right thing to do. So look, there are some that are doing it better than others. The power here is that we're advocating that central government, and using its extraordinary balance sheet at the moment, should put social procurement at the heart of it, and that actually it should be measured, and it should be a factor that's not a nice to have, but it's a core requirement of any tender.
Thank you. Councillor Brunning.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Very interesting. I'm just interested on the delivery of capacity and capability side of things. New Zealand doesn't have a very good track record in recent years. The Fletchers, companies that have disappeared, Transmission Gully, latest fiasco. How are we going to address that?
Yeah, really good question. I go back again to the construction sector accord. If you have a look there are 7 ministers that are actually in there. It's actually a public-private sector collaboration. We were very lucky that it got set up last year so that coming into this crisis, we could actually have a lot of the issues on the table, a lot of the relationships built. And actually, you know, as far as the government response goes, from my perspective, that has been the most agile and quickest to respond in terms of contractual certainty, in terms of getting funding out there, in terms of the RMA fast track response that we've just seen. But there are major systemic problems. That's a $40 billion industry in which we have for decades underinvested. So again, like any partnership, there's a whole work plan, and everyone needs to give a little to get a lot. What we've had as a construction industry is completely unsustainable. Capacity and capability, I was on a discussion with MB about this yesterday. The construction sector accord is committed to having both a demand side and supply side capability and capacity pipeline out by December this year. They don't currently have a plan for that. And that's actually, from a government perspective, pretty bloody bold to put out there that they'll have an outcome without a way to get it. Massey University, the Quake Centre out of Christchurch, which built this in response to the Christchurch and Kaikoura quakes, and ourselves have basically put a proposal together to have an open data network that would have a look at the supply side so that we understand where, by region, by sector, and nationally, we have skills and gaps. Because that is one of the things that's holding ministers back, is they want to invest a lot more in infrastructure. They know they need to, but they're not confident that the industry can deliver because we've got no data. So it's a little bit of physician heal thyself. So there is a joint plan to get that sorted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any further questions, either from councillors or staff members? If there are none, I have one final question for you, Paul, and that is, what does exemplar community engagement look like in this grand plan?
It's a very big question, Councillor. So, but I think that we have had a number of multi-award winning projects here in New Zealand. And unfortunately in New Zealand, we tend to the glass half empty rather than half full. But we had a webinar this last week where we looked at SCIRT, which is the horizontal infrastructure response post-Christchurch, NICTA, which was the one for post-Kaikoura, the AC36 Wynyard Edge Alliance in Auckland, the National War Memorial Museum. All of these are great examples. They tend to be alliances in which you have a partnership arrangement with client, contractor and community. You tend to have rapid community engagement. It tends to be that we take some of the uncertainty out of the RMA because the project is going to happen. The question is how it's going to happen. And those voices need to be heard initially, but then part of the delivery. Whereas what we have to do at the moment is we've got ourselves to a litigious and complex place in the RMA where we have to design to 105% of the solution that allows for no ability for the community to pivot, add input or innovate as we go through. And so the only thing out of that is, I heard a couple of years ago, Tauranga City Council was spending 18% of its capital budget on redoing RMA consents and business cases for the government. That is a sort of chronic waste that we have in our system that we just need to turn around. So there needs to be trust, but we've got to be bolder. At the moment, we're run by the lowest common denominator, squeakiest voice. All voices need to have the ability to be heard, but we have run away from doing good for the many in order to look after the squeaky few. And I think we need to get more balance into that.
Thank you, Paul. Any further questions from anybody? Just looking at mine, no. Paul, thank you, an outstanding presentation. Absolutely huge food for thought. I'm sure Stuart, as Vice President of Local Government New Zealand, felt that poke in the eye a little bit. So, a really, really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you so much for your time and energy that you put into this, and hopefully we will be in touch and keep in touch. So thank you on behalf of the council. It's been a magnificent presentation. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, one and all. And look, an open offer, if I can assist with anyone, please reach out to me. We're here to try and help move it forward for NZ Inc., as I know you are too. So we're here to help as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillors, I'm now going to move a motion that we receive the presentation from New Zealand Infrastructure. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor von Dadelsum. Councillors, do you wish to have any discussion with regards the presentation that you've just heard before I put the motion of receipt? Councillors wish to have any discussion? No, I'm going to put the motion.
Paula, I've just raised my hand, which you may not have seen. I just want to suggest that the report, which I sent a link to you last night, I think all councillors ought to receive that report. It really is one of the most fundamental things we have seen. It espouses many of the ideas which you have been talking about since I've been on council. And I just think it does take some digesting, but I really do think that all councillors ought to have access to the full report itself.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Love. And certainly it is on the Infrastructure New Zealand website, so be grateful if staff could make that link available. Also on the Infrastructure New Zealand website is a fascinating webinar that they conducted in the last couple of weeks with Minister Twyford. And he was extremely explicit in terms of what the government's priorities are and their reform agenda. And it's well worth a listen to because it's pretty clear that there is a reform agenda. And in terms of Paul's presentation, we all need to hopefully be working to the same outcomes. So thank you, Councillor Love. I'm going to put that motion all those in favour.
Madam Chair, I did have my hand up. I'd just like to make a comment if I could.
Beg your pardon, Stuart, I didn't see it. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Look, I think Paul's presentation was superb. It highlighted a whole range of structural issues that are facing New Zealand, from a regulatory dog's breakfast right through to a lack of a national plan, through to funding inequities, etc. But the key is going to be how are we collectively as New Zealand Inc., including our sector, LG&Z, going to resolve these. It's not as if they are new problems, they've been around for a long time, but it is going to take leadership, in my view, from particularly the government of the day, to release themselves from their own regulatory bureaucracy. And that is going to be the challenge. Stopgap measures that are going to assist through the RMA changes are just that. What he didn't show you was a very complex overlay between the Local Government Act, the Resource Management Act, and the Land Transport Management Act. And when you put that all together, it looks like a bowl of spaghetti. And unless that is addressed, in other words, the power to make change, then not much will actually change. And Infrastructure New Zealand have been focused on that for some time, and we're part of, I guess, you know, that bowl of spaghetti. So a superb presentation, but in my view, unless there's some structural changes, it will be business as usual.
Okay, so thank you for that. However, sorry, can't let that comment go without adding a comment that what I heard Paul say, it's going to take all parties to offer something. So I think this is we're at a threshold in New Zealand's future where those that are in positions to influence this do need to come to the party in a constructive and a collaborative way like never before, including obviously community and our Māori partners. So I put the motion, all those in favour say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Councillors, I'm now going to move to the Chairperson's operating report, which was circulated to you under separate cover. It's really in two parts. The first part is around our strategic directions, and the second part is an update in terms of mainly regulatory government initiatives. Stephen, are you here?
Through the chair, it's Namuta Potasi here, General Manager of Strategy and Science. Both myself and Stephen Lamb are here. Yep.
Thank you, Namuta. The opening comments in terms of this report, and my focus is on the strategic directions section. The key message that I'm urging us as a council to do is to take the time to stop and stare and review our current strategic directions. We put an awful lot of work into arriving at our strategic directions, but since we did that, the world has changed. And it is appropriate, in fact, I believe absolutely essential that we take the time to review those strategic directions just to make sure that they are appropriate and fit for purpose in light of a very changed world and operating environment, both in the short and longer term. So the key focus for that really is to say, let's make the time as the governance body to work with staff and community in terms of just making sure that we have appropriately analysed and pitched our strategic directions, because we are looking at a bold new world. So that was really the first part. Now I know Mr. Lamb presumably would like to make a comment on that. Mr. Lamb?
Through the chair, it's Namuta here. I think you've summarised it really nicely.
Okay. So look, could I just ask, in terms of that particular matter, do any councillors not agree that we actually do need to take some time to actually review and, if necessary, and I underline that, if necessary, reset our strategic directions? It may be that they're perfectly okay, but let's take the time as the governance body to actually do that. Is anybody opposed? Great.
Oh,
So,
sorry, I had my hand up. I totally agree with you and would support us taking time to do that. But also at the same time, like to look at how that may overlap with our recovery planning, which is also underway.
thank you, Councillor Nees. Yeah, look, I'm sorry, my participants bar doesn't allow me to see you all at the same time, so apologies. I'll keep checking that. Is there any other councillor that wishes to speak to that particular matter? If not, Namuta and Stephen, do you wish to comment on the second part of the report, which is the update in terms of particularly regulatory government initiatives?
Through the chair, we'll take that as read. Just to note that work is continuing, particularly in the freshwater space, and it is continuing on track in terms of timeframes.
Namuta, do we have any update in terms of when we may receive news from the central government in terms of the freshwater reforms?
I understand that there was a freshwater subgroup meeting towards the end of last week. However, I do not have any updates at this point in time in terms of any new dates. As far as I was aware, they are still working to the same timeframes as previous.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions or comments on regards the update of the regulatory environment? Don't appear to be any. No. Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, this operating environment is incredibly critical, particularly at the moment as we move forward for the next 12 to 24 months. And I'd certainly like to see it updated on a regular basis, not necessarily through this committee, because things, as we're all aware, are moving quickly. The government is moving quickly, which is a good thing, but we just want to make sure that on matters that impact the regional sector in our communities, that we're aware of them and that we make sure that they'll actually work appropriately on the ground. And I think that's one of our key roles. It's all very well for bureaucrats in Wellington to come up with bright ideas, but how they're actually actioned and the ramifications on the ground in various communities up and down New Zealand can be different. And we need to keep our eye on the ball to make sure that our community is properly represented through these changes.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. The Chairman.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question to Stuart. Stuart, do we have a confirmed date for central government, local government forum? Because that may put some understanding around some of the timing of some of these issues.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we do. It's later this month, and we're just working through what the program will actually be. There's absolutely no doubt that moving forward from COVID-19 will be the lead issue on that rather than what we would normally talk about. So that program is being, as I say, debated now, and how it'll be further, I guess, noted throughout the whole of our sectors, the various sectors, and basically to every Kiwi. So yes, it is, and we're looking forward to that. It's been set for some time.
Thank you. Councillor Brunning.
Yeah, sorry about this. Yes, going back to the climate change, I just wouldn't want the public to think that we're not considering climate change, and we have been for a long time in a lot of our projects that we've been doing. So take the river schemes, we're looking at the effects of climate change 50 and 100 years out in our forward planning and the works that we're doing there. So while we always welcome and need to do more, don't think that we're not already doing quite a bit.
Thanks, Councillor Brunning. Any further questions or commentary in relation to the report?
Happy to move receipt of the Chairman's Operating Environment Report, Chairman.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Nees, further debate, discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. So we're now going to move to item 8.2 on the agenda, which is the Smart Growth Leadership Group Agreement and Memorandum of Understanding. Just to reiterate that this morning you received some additional information that included a document which provided some amendments to the document, the MOU that we had previously been circulated. And I'm going to get Namuta to talk us through those particular changes that have been made. Those changes have been made as a result of this council just expressing some little bit of concern that we need to make sure that the wording in the agreement doesn't commit us to things that we actually haven't seen yet or considered, such as the UFTI agreement. But we also want to acknowledge the superb amount of work that's been going on in the background, in particular in relation to the Urban Development Partnership. So we don't in any way want to be seen as trying to hold up really good progress, rather than just that the wording is appropriate for due consideration. The other additional material you received is a presentation that was given in confidence in terms of the Urban Development Partnership. So if there is to be any discussion on that, we will need to do that with the public excluded. So I wonder, I also believe, Fiona, are you with us?
Through the chair, it's Namuta Potasi here. We have both Fiona McTavish here, CEO, as well as Ken Tremaine.
Oh, beg your pardon. Okay. So, so just perhaps what I would like to do, if it's at all possible, I would like if Namuta or Ken would like to just outline perhaps the background to the work in progress, which, as I say, has been going on at some pace. So Ken or Namuta, if you'd like to do that, then to talk through the proposed amendments to the MOU, and then perhaps to ask our Chief Executive whether, in light of the recommendations on our order paper, whether she would like to propose any additional recommendations or otherwise. So if people are comfortable with that, perhaps just call Namuta on you and Ken to perhaps just outline the work that has been going on and why we are receiving these reports today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll hand over to Ken shortly before coming back and just closing out with some reflections and a proposed new recommendation for you to consider. So I'll draw your attention to page 23 of the agenda, and I'll hand over to Ken to provide that high-level overview before we, as the chair has directed, before we go through those amendments. And then finally, I'll wrap up with a proposed additional recommendation in light of the conversations that we've had today from Paul earlier today and reflecting the comments that have been received.
So my apologies to you, Ken. I didn't appreciate that you were here. So a warm welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to be present here today. Ken, would you be good enough just simply to outline for councillors your various roles, because you're involved not only as the strategic advisor to Smart Growth, but I believe involved also in the Waikato Urban Development Partnership. So a warm welcome, thank you, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and councillors. Very quickly, the documentation you have before you is a framework for engaging with government. The government is interested in trying to do a lot better. I mean, you heard Paul Blair this morning quite creatively looking at the funding alternatives that are alive and well in parts of Australia, particularly at state government level. Minister Twyford very early on got an urban growth agenda about 2 or 3 years ago. There are a number of areas in New Zealand outside of Auckland, in particular the Waikato, where I'm involved. I chair the government official steering group for the Hamilton-Auckland corridor. They start off with the minister, I think, wanting a faster train set between Hamilton and Auckland. We have the Bay of Plenty and the links economically from an Upper North Island point of view. Through to Wellington, they're looking at better coordination through to the Wairarapa and up the Kapiti Coast. And then to Queenstown, of course, which has a whole range of challenging problems of its own, because it's got a very small economic and ratepayer base, but of course a huge visitor base. And there are sort of challenges in there. So what the government's tended to do, and what we've done in the Waikato through my Future Proof Implementation Advisor role, we've widened the membership of the committee. We're trying to use existing structures rather than starting over. It's just all too many fish to start from scratch. So in the Waikato, we've added 2 cabinet ministers to the Future Proof Implementation Committee as proposed now. That's been running since August last year. We've added Auckland Council representation through the Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore, the Franklin Local Board, and we've added tangata whenua representation through the Kaitiaki Mana Whenua Forum as well, in addition to Waikato Tainui. So there's a framework in there, and what the government tends to do is take the joint agreement as proposed here, take it through cabinet, mandate those ministers to sit on the Smart Growth Leadership Group and interact. And I think it has been hugely helpful having Phil Twyford sorry, I'm just having a senior moment on names, and
Namuta.
Nanai Mahuta, and Namuta, apologies, I keep having this, Nanai Mahuta, particularly in terms of water, conservation, the various other Māori economic development, etc. So they do come to the table. I must admit, I'm aware that I was listening to Paul Blair with interest, because I just joined when he was getting to the Waikato example, and it is a theoretical example, but good on him for putting it together. Then your Scott Hamilton's in partly the same space here with a different set of alternatives as well. So they come to the table, they're trying to deliver better coordination across government, better timeliness of investment across the multiple functions, because I'm not sure about the Bay, but I think in the Waikato, for every dollar that local government spends, central government spends about 9. That will be across corrections, education, health, everything else. We're not very good in the urban development space of getting coordination across the various activities. So that's what this is designed to do, is to really just frame up a code for some government engagement that we look at and amend, they look at and amend, and then it goes through cabinet and ministers join the table. So we've had 3 meetings now, 2 face-to-face, August and November last year in the Waikato, and then by Zoom the other day. There were 53 people on it. It seemed to work okay. So that's just by way of brief overview background. So it's just setting up a framework for some engagement.
So through the chair, just to highlight and bring us back to the relevant paper, there are 2 key attachments. The first is the Smart Growth Agreement, and this paper is seeking approval for that. And then the second is the MOU, which we are seeking approval in principle of. And so perhaps if we can take you now through the specific changes to the document that was sent through this morning. Yvonne, I think my video has been stopped. Yep, there we go. Thank you. And now, Shari, did you have the presentation to bring up? Otherwise, I can just speak to those amendments that were sent through. So drawing your attention to Appendix 2, which is the Smart Growth. So there were no proposed changes to Appendix 1, which was the agreement. Appendix 2, which is what you have seen on the screen in front of you, is the first of the amendments. And so this came about in terms of the acknowledgement that we are progressing collectively and in collaboration with our partners in the development of the Urban Form and Transport Initiative that is yet to be completed, and will be going up to the Smart Growth Leadership Group shortly before coming back to Council for approval. So the first amendment you see at the top of your screen there is subject to the completion and adoption, recognition and support of the existing UFD, which underpins the development of the joint sub-regional spatial plan. So that was just in recognition that the work is currently underway. The next change is under section 4 under outcomes, and in terms of the commitment to the development and implementation of agreed investment funding, you'll note where practicable has been inserted in the beginning of that bullet point. Coming down to the next few bullet points under commit to examining the opportunities for development of an inter-regional collaboration between smart growth and future-proof partnerships with a strategic intent to have a joint Hamilton-Auckland-Tauranga corridor approach to spatial planning, particularly relating to transportation. There was a desire here to acknowledge that with our region, we work quite closely with other territorial authorities, and it's important that they have the opportunity to be part of this as well. So hence the amended wording there, noting that where appropriate, this initiative will also include other authorities where agreed. And the next point underneath that is you'll see has been updated to include subject to financial analysis, invest in all infrastructure together through innovative funding and financing tools. And therein lies the full set of proposed amendments for your consideration. I would just add as well, in terms of those changes, we do propose a new recommendation because given these documents were developed to recognise the need to partner with central government and central government funding in the region, and we've heard from Paul earlier today about the importance of that central government funding. It's been quite clear that since COVID-19, central government is interested in investment in the regions with the Crown infrastructure projects, and more recently the LGFA, who are proposing to raise the debt cap from 250% to 300%, as well as suggesting local government works with the Reserve Bank to introduce 100-year low interest bonds. We as staff expect that all of these new tools will benefit the Western Bay, especially the partners, including Tauranga City Council, given its financial position. So given the significant central government post-COVID-19 investment in the regions, we do recommend a further recommendation to this Strategy and Policy Committee as follows. So Shari, I'm not sure whether you have the proposed recommendation available for consideration as well.
Yes, I do. I'll just bring it up for you.
I'll read it out for obviously the committee's consideration, that we note that a key benefit of these agreements are working with central government to secure infrastructure funding for the Western Bay. And since COVID-19, central government has introduced and supported further funding and financing tools to support job creation and growth in the region. And we expect that these tools will be key to the agreement of investment and funding principles outlined in these agreements.
Okay, thank you, Namuta. So what I'd like to do, councillors, is I'd like firstly to invite you, before we look at these proposed amendments, I invite you, if you'd like to ask any questions or make any comments whilst we have Ken here. So I see that Councillor Nees, you wish to comment or raise questions?
It's just a question, and it's not about the MOU, it's about the Smart Growth Leadership Group agreement and the terms of reference, which have different provisions for meeting frequency. One says quarterly, the other says bi-monthly, and I was just seeking clarification that they are supposed to be the same.
Apologies, Councillor Nees. Yes, they are, and we will make sure they are. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had noted that already, and sorry, I should have mentioned it.
So do any other councillors have any questions or general comments around the substance of these reports before we deal with the amendments? Yes, Councillor Crosby.
Apologies, I was just going to make a small comment on the new Amendment 5. Do you want that now or later?
I'd like to just basically have general questions of Ken and or comments before we deal specifically with the proposed amendments, if that's okay. So
That's
would you
fine.
mind just, okay. So
certainly as a high level concept, I absolutely support this initiative. It's building a stronger relationship with the Crown, which is absolutely critical. And I go back actually to 2005 when we brought in NZTA. It wasn't called that then, it was Transit Fund into the Smart Growth Partnership through Rick Van Barneveld, who was then CE. So to my mind, this is the next level up, and I absolutely support it.
So general questions or comments from Councillor Winters and then Councillor Brunning.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ken, for that wee alteration in the documents. Support it now. And I really support these MOUs with the Crown, Madam Chair, because I'll give you one example that's shown great benefit to this district. It was when the Rotorua Lake Strategy Group was formed back in 2006. And the partnership is between Tiara Lakes Trust Regional Council and District Council. And we were going nowhere fast because we had no commitment from the Crown. So we formed, through John Cronin, dear John, we formed a MOU with the Ministry for the Environment to say, you people have to be on board with us. And the MOU was very high level. And it was really a commitment from them to be on board through the strategy group. And since then, once the MOU was signed, the funds have flowed from the Crown for the restoration of the lakes. So these MOUs do work. So I'm looking at this with great confidence in how it has supported us in the past and what it's done for this district. And I'm pleased that we could be part of it at high level, because I saw that diagram including the Waikato Regional Council for that northern Central North Island corridor. So happy to support this today, Madam Chair, as an initial step, and probably in future times, I hope we're a partner to this as well, but really supportive of the MOU and the amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. Councillor Brunning and then Councillor von Dadelsson.
Yes, thank you. And I'm supportive of the amendments and the document, the MOU. Just on the practical side, we talk about Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, and there's been a lot of work has been done in Auckland to Hamilton, and then we come across the plains and we come to the Como Range. And we just have to remind ourselves that no one has ever considered how we're going to climb, tunnel, or go through that range to give us that connectivity that we all pray for. So just that's something that has to be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. I think, Ken, you would agree with that, would you not?
Yes, I think that it's important that we start to get the transport and the economic linkages through the Waikato and the Bay, and that they're seeing from coast to hinterland and hinterland back to the coast. And one of the obvious things, Councillor Brunning, is to look at the rail capacity and look at what needs to be done in terms of some investment there that needs its own focus. Now with the rail plan and some hopefully dedicated funding and an emphasis on rail, we might be able to tackle some of these legacy infrastructure issues, because they are very important for regenerating the economy.
Thank you, Ken. Councillor von Dadelsson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I support the principle of what we're trying to achieve here. It is absolutely critical that we improve the collaboration between all our partners, including and bringing central government into the fold. However, when we look at this MOU in detail, I do have still some concerns, and I don't believe the Bay of Plenty Regional Council has been well served in that at the last meeting of Smart Growth, it was asked for alternates to remain. We had alternates when members couldn't be there. This MOU does not allow for that. We have an exceptional circumstance in the Bay of Plenty where we have two of our members of Smart Growth who are senior members in local government New Zealand and are called away quite regularly in that responsibility. And as such, we lose our voting ability with them not being there. And that's why alternates are important. We raised this, Councillor Nees raised it at the last meeting, and I felt she was disrespected at that meeting and in her viewpoint, and to the detriment of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And I would like this to be taken back to smart growth, to be revisited. As it stands, if our two members are called away, we have one vote. We have the other issue I have is that the independent chair has a vote, and there's no reason for the independent chair to have a vote. He could have the same vote as the whole of the regional council. We are a major funding participant in this partnership, and while I'm happy for that to continue, we do need fair representation, and I think this does need to be taken back to that before this MOU is finally signed off.
Thank you, Councillor von Dadelsen. I think that we'll need to have a motion, and that motion will need to be tested as we go through the proposed recommendations. So if someone somewhere would be good enough to take on board the thrust of Councillor von Dadelsen's matters and construct a proposed motion that the meeting can accordingly consider. So thank you. I've now got Councillor Eadie, followed by Councillor Thurston.
Kia ora, Chair. My question is a general question regarding, I guess we just saw in the presentation from Paul Blair regarding regional-wide partnerships, forums, and an example over in the Waikato. Would we be looking in the future at a region-wide type smart growth model? Because I know there's been discussions in the Eastern Bay about we've got the joint committee and we've got another group which has some members of parliament as part of that group, the RGLG something acronym. So yeah, I'm wondering, is that on the books if the central government is wanting us to look regionally, to bring ministers on board, all of the mayors? Is that something that is on the horizon?
Namuta, would you like to comment on that question, please?
Yep, so through the chair, we're always looking to see how we can work collaboratively across the region. One of the amendments that we're proposing to make as part of this MOU is to look at extending that bullet point in particular about the connection between Auckland, Waikato and Tauranga to include further territorial authorities. And having tested that with a member of the MHUD, they are really supportive of that opportunity.
Thank you. So, Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to also record my support for the thrust of the MOU and the revised wording and the new recommendation 5. And I think whoever decided to invite Paul Blair today, it was very timely and his comments were very appropriate in terms of the need for greater collaboration and a need to ramp up partnerships with central government. But the other question I also had is, are we drafting off camera a further recommendation 6 to support Councillor von Dadelsen's comments?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Thurston. I have, perhaps Namuta, could you confirm that someone is proposing a draft? I intend to take the recommendations, probably leaving that one as a separate motion, so we can have some debate and discussion about it. Councillor Nees.
Just wanted to note that I'd be happy to second Councillor von Dadelsen's recommendation for consideration.
Thank you,
so,
Councillor
Madam Chair,
Nees.
are you wanting someone to move 1 to 5 at this point, and we'll deal with that separately?
Councillor Thurston, I wonder, Shari, in Namuta, has somebody drafted a proposed motion for potentially recommendation 6?
It's in train.
Okay. So let's, Councillor Thurston,
I'm happy to move 1 to 5, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'll second.
Who was that? Councillor Rose, was it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further debate and discussion around recommendations 1 through 5?
Yes, I do.
Crosby?
Yeah, could Shari put 5 up, please?
I will share my screen, and I have made some amendments, but please let me know if these are suitable.
If I could, Madam Chair, I absolutely support the thrust of it, but oops, I see the key benefit. Shari, can you just scroll it up to 5?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I see the key benefit actually working with central government is not just about infrastructure funding. It's actually about developing a comprehensive partnership, including infrastructure funding. So to my understanding, that's what it's all about. And I think we should note particularly that it's around a comprehensive funded partnership that includes the securement of infrastructure funding.
So perhaps, Councillor Crosby, we could look at recommendation 5, noting that a key benefit of these agreements are working in partnership with central government, including the securing of appropriate infrastructure funding for the Western Bay of Plenty, Would that sit okay with you?
Yes, it would, yeah.
So Shari.
But I think it's important.
Thank you. So Shari, so note that a key benefit of these agreements are working in partnership with central government, which includes securing appropriate infrastructure funding for the Western Bay of Plenty, and noting that since COVID-19, okay, yes, okay. So Councillor Nees, with your astute eye for incredible detail, appropriate grammar, etc., how does that proposed recommendation look to you?
I think it covers the bases. It's a long sentence, but I think it says everything we need it to say.
Thank you. Fiona, I do recognise I've got Councillor Etty and Councillor Thurston, but Fiona Namuta, are you comfortable with those proposed changes to recommendation 5?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm happy as the mover, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. It was seconded, I believe, by Councillor Nees. Was that correct?
No, Councillor Rose.
Councillor Rose. I do beg your pardon, Councillor Rose. So further debate and discussion on recommendations 1 through 5. There are no further comments. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Sorry, Councillor. I noted that I think I saw something on recommendation 1. Could we go up to have a look?
So further to that, we've just in the chat section, through the chair, in the chat section, we have recommended a new recommendation rather than changing recommendation 1. And you'll see that that new recommendation is that BOPRC recommend to Smart Growth Partners that councils retain the ability to appoint alternative members and that the independent chairperson be a non-voting person.
Okay, thank you. So debate and discussion with regards 1. Councillor von Dadelsen and Councillor Nees, does that adequately record your particular matters?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Councillor Nees, you're on mute. Jane, you're mute.
Yeah. Yes, I support that. And that is going to be recommendation 6.
Yes.
I think what they've done is that they have included that in number 1. Is that correct?
We're now proposing to split it out as a separate recommendation 6.
Thank you. Okay. Further debate and discussion on that? There is
Can we
none.
just see 1 again? Can you scroll up to 1 again, please? Thank you. Oh, okay. So that's gone. Right. Yep.
Okay, good to go. Councillor Nees, you've got your hand up. Are you okay? Right. Put the motion. All those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against, and carried. Councillors, thank you very much. And Ken, could I thank you very much? And can we record to you and to the staff that we are greatly appreciative of all the work that's been carried out on this particular matter. It's an exciting opportunity to really work in true partnership with central government. So well done and thank you. And I hope that our amendments, find favour. So thank you all very much indeed. Is there any further business to be conducted on that item? Noting that there was a confidential presentation given to you. Can you just indicate to me now whether you would like to discuss that with the public excluded or simply have that for your information? I'll take it that there's to be no discussion on that particular item.
Paula, has that resolution 6, was that included in the,
yes.
in the initial? It was. Okay, sorry.
Done. No, all good. Done. All right, so Yvonne or Shari, anything else that I've missed, or Namuta, in terms of the smart growth matters? We're good to go.
Through the chair, good to go. Just to recognise as well, we did send through the amended wording that we received through to Tauranga City Council, who are also looking at this matter today in their council meeting right now. So they have already circulated the updates that were circulated to you this morning.
Thank you, Namota. Okay, so now moving on to the development of an interregional marine pest pathway plan. Chris and Greg, you are going to be talking to this report, which I hope you will be able to take as read. Very comprehensive report. Congratulations on it. So do I have Chris and or Greg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and I'll just leave Greg to take this one on our behalf. Thanks.
Sorry, can't hear. Greg, are you there?
We may have just lost Greg. He'd been waiting patiently. Sorry, he'd been waiting patiently for all this time, and he appears to have been lost off the connection. Sorry about that. Yes, Madam Chair, we'll take the report as read, and I will attempt to answer any questions and hope that Greg comes back on.
Greg
we
is
could
on.
move to the Greg's
I
on.
can see him.
Oh, can you?
Yeah. No problem.
Greg, can you
yes.
say hello?
You can see him, but you can't hear him.
Greg?
Talk, Greg.
Okay.
No,
I think,
apparently he can't be heard. His connection's not, apologies, councillors, Greg's place of residence is not as well connected as some of us are with internet. Okay, well, no doubt he'll show by facial expressions, Chris, whether you're doing a good job on his behalf or not. So, okay, so I'm going to open it now to questions, starting with Councillor Winters.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the report. So just a couple of questions from me. This applies to all boats, recreational and commercial, correct? That's a nod, so it does.
Yes.
And just, and it applies to just saltwater. Is that correct? Yep, that's a nod.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, because I do for the lakes, how can we incorporate in this the some of the suggestions that the Lakes Water Quality Society wanted for the boat certification process? Can we not combine the two of them? That's a question, because I saw very similar discussions thinking, well, this will work for the lakes too. So that's the first thing. And then for option 4 on page 49 of the agenda, it talks about between moving into and between designated places. So I haven't got a copy of where those designated places were, or sites of significance, or there was no reference to where would those, give me an example of what would be a designated place for option 4. And then I've got another couple of questions after that too, Madam Chair.
In the absence of Greg being able to speak, which must be incredibly frustrating for him because he's probably got the answers, but certainly, Councillor Winters, that there's a major difference between the marine pathway of pest spread and if you look at the lakes, the boats travel by road to travel into the lakes. So the way we're managing that, as you'll be aware, is through the boat ramps and trying to have increase our policing of boat ramps so that people who are launching their boats and travelling from lake to lake or from another region into our district and launching their boats into our lakes, that those inspections of their boat hulls occur at the point of entry. So having in that situation, you don't really need a marine pathway management plan, because the marine pathway management plan is for the boat that's leaving, say, Whangarei Harbour and steaming down to the Bay of Plenty and entering one of our saltwater ports, whether it be Tauranga Moana or further south. So yeah, I think they're two different pathways, and that's the key to this, is that incorporating them. I know that they're very similar issues because they're managing boats, but they're two different pathways to managing that issue. In terms of your other question, I'm sorry, but I can't actually answer that. So I'm looking at the attached report, but I'll get back to you hopefully, or Greg will.
There's nothing in the attached report of where would those designated places be.
Okay.
Can I suggest Greg does it through chat?
Can he go on his phone?
Yeah.
Get on his phone.
Question through the chair.
Hold on. I've got a number of councillors who have their hands up. So I've got Councillor Nees, Councillor Eaty and Councillor Clark now. But before I invite Councillor Nees, can we just have an understanding, is it okay that Councillor Winters, that Chris and Greg get back to you on that matter? Councillor Winters?
Yeah, he was nodding, I think.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I was nodding and I thought I was...
Okay, so Councillor Nees, Councillor Eaty and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I think my question's a bit of a stupid one, really, but my understanding was that we inspect the hulls of boats while they're actually at mooring, when they're actually at rest. And I didn't really understand the options assessment for option 3, because you're recommending that we develop the rules requiring biofouling thresholds for craft to be met while moving, and it's said to be efficient and it's easy to implement, monitor and enforce. So are you suggesting that we'll be monitoring that while boats are moving? I just don't understand that.
Sorry, I'm not sure I can help with that one either, Councillor Nees. I see where you're talking about that column of the table too. But I, like you, assume that we have to wait for a boat to stop moving before we can dive down and look at the hull. So there's an obvious practical constraint there. Greg is typing away in the chat bar, and I see that he's mentioned special places are examples such as marine reserves, aquaculture farms and harbours, but yet to be defined. And then he's put will require a vessel tracking system. So it sounds like there's some complications here when you get into the detail, as there often are with planning processes. So hopefully he'll come up with an answer to your question too, Councillor Nees.
Okay, I've got Councillor Eaty, Clark and Rose. Councillor Eaty.
Kia ora, Chair. Hey, Chris, I think Greg just actually answered my question. It was around vehicle tracking. And so when it's monitored, I was just wondering about the mechanism in place when a boat is inspected. Do they receive tags or some sort of all clear type system? But yeah, I guess that comes under vehicle tracking. That's my question. Sorry, Chris, is that right? Is that the vehicle tracking in terms of when you inspect a vehicle, that it will be tagged and entered into some sort of system?
Yeah, Greg is nodding and he's put in correct in the Zoom chat.
Thank you.
So can everyone access the Zoom chat room? Because Greg's doing his utmost to give us some good information there. So thank you. So is that it, Councillor Eating? So Councillor Clark and then Councillor Rose.
Yeah, fine, thanks. Mine was actually very much in line with Councillor Eating's. It really was centred around compliance of the thing. I mean, I have a friend currently out there who's in lockdown, vacillating between Tauranga and Auckland, and just what the criteria for that is and tracking. But Greg will answer that anyway, I'm sure. Thanks.
And Councillor Rose.
Yeah. So I guess my question is how well have staff, obviously this has been an ongoing thing for quite a while, but how well are staff working between the multiple TON councils? Because obviously this is an extraordinary circumstance of having to try and create an interregional pretty much partnership between five or six different regional and unitary councils. So how is the work, how's the process there with working with one another in the way of staff, in the way of staff work and discussion?
Yeah, I can probably cover that one off, Councillor. Look at the unitary councils. There's only 16 of them, so if Greg could speak, he would say he has a very close relationship with his colleagues, and particularly the northern ones, but probably all of them. So yeah, this is almost second nature to people like Greg and his colleagues, that they see an issue that is biosecurity related and they take it upon themselves to resolve it. The more difficult ones is not the interregional relationships, it's probably more the relationships with the central government agencies, because they tend to take a slightly different view. They don't have the same issues and functions as we do. They look at things on a national level. So their MPI, for example, would probably consider border control at ports and airports to be their highest priority. So the spread of pests within New Zealand is probably not their number one, where it is for us, it is as regions. So yeah, but we are getting there, and as with all of these things, I think the relationships are the key to this. And if you form good relationships and communicate well with your partners, then that's how you get places. And I personally would congratulate Greg for his work on this, because it's taking time, but we are slowly getting there. And this is a first. I don't think there is another interregional plan under the Biosecurity Act that I'm aware of. So hopefully Greg's nodding there. Yes, he is. So this will be a first, and it's if we can get it through the process, it's still got a way to go, but I think it will be something to be proud of for all of the regional sector if we can achieve this.
Well, I think well said, Chris, and I'm sure all of us would like to pass on our congratulations to Greg for obviously some superb work that's being done here. So it's a shame, Greg, we can't hear you, but congratulations and well done. Yeah, fine work. So I can't see any other councillors with their hands up at this present point in time. Turning to the report, you'll notice that there are in fact 5 recommendations. This committee only has the power to recommend to the full council on this matter. So is there somebody who's prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor Winters. Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
seconded by Councillor Rose. Further debate or discussion? There being none, I'm going to put that motion. And again, thank you very much, Greg, for your fine efforts. Thank you. So, councillors, we're now going to move to the final report in the open section of our agenda, which is the Natural Hazards Way Forward project, a very important piece of work. And I'll just close down Suri. So, who we have, NASA? Is NASA going to speak to this report?
Yes. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes. Can all councillors hear? Yes.
Okay, so Morena councillors. So this is an information-only report. Essentially, it's to inform you of a Natural Hazards Way Forward project that was initiated at the beginning of the year. That was led by Barrister Sharon Wooler with assistance from James Hughes from Tonkin and Taylor. And some of you will be familiar with Sharon. She used to be a barrister with Cooney Lees Morgan. It's now independent. But basically, we'd received for some time a number of concerns particularly from Western Bay and Tauranga City Councils about the ability to implement the RPS natural hazards provisions. And it's similar to the comment that Chris made earlier. It's not until you start ground truthing some of the provisions after they're made operative that we find some of the issues during the implementation. The same can be said for the Regional Policy Statement natural hazards provisions. They did win a number of international and national awards, but the devil's in the detail. So Sharon embarked on interviewing and consulting with council staff and external consultants, namely engineers and planners, to look to validate and substantiate some of the issues that have been bandied about for a few months now. And it's primarily to do with the ability to meet the smart growth future requirements and the Regional Policy Statement urban growth agenda. A number of those issues have now been substantiated. There's 11 that have been listed there. And in terms of the action plan moving forward, the two main recommendations are to establish, or regional councils to establish and fully resource a natural hazards working group that would be responsible for working collaboratively to identify and resolve implementation and interpretation issues and best practice guidance. And also, there's a potential for an RPS change to amend some of the natural hazards provisions to overcome the barriers that have been encountered to date. And in that regard, we're foreshadowing having a further more detailed workshop with councillors on the 18th of June, and also amendments to the Natural Hazards Planning Charter that's been, again, operational since 2016. So I think in a nutshell, that's essentially what's come out of this report. And I think I could probably leave it there and open it up to questions at this point in time.
Thank you, Nessa. Questions from Councillor Winters and then Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on page 98, down the bottom there, and Nessa, you touched on the two key recommendations, Bay of Trinity lead and fully resource a natural hazards working group. So does that mean we require more money in this year's annual plan, or can you do it within your current budget?
Yes, I believe we can do it within the current budget.
Cool.
Just to note there that we do rely heavily on our engineers, and I understand engineering have clearance to source additional input there, and then we are looking to get some technical input from an external consultant to contribute to the working group, but our belief is that there's sufficient resourcing available to implement the working group and within the existing budget.
Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to NASA, will the working group have a direct link through to the development community who have to execute these issues on the ground, or will it just be limited to local government representatives and consultants? Personally, I think there has to be a direct link through to the Developers Working Party, particularly the one TCC has, which is very useful.
Yes, yes. So that link would be through TCC. I understand that they do report up to that group, their collective. At this point in time, we've internally developed terms of reference for the working group. So I don't propose including members of that collective in the working group, but we do expect that we're going to continue to keep them informed and updated on the project as we progress.
Councillor Crosby, just before I recognise Councillor Nees, you mentioned, I think, that the Minister of Local Government, Nanai Mahuta, advised in a recent discussion with Local Government New Zealand that natural hazard and resilience work was extremely important. Are we likely to see anything happen, do you believe, in this space that may or may not impact this particular really important work stream going forward? I know that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do notice that central government are clearly taking a very active interest in this space.
Yes, I think through Madam Chair that in due course that might be part of a more regionalised or larger package that actually Paul was talking about from Infrastructure New Zealand, you know, when he had those maps up as an example. I don't think that will necessarily be in the first tranche of work. The first tranche of work is going to be focused particularly on drinking water and the balance of the waters. But there will also be an overview in due course with regard to coastal inundation, natural hazards, etc. But we don't know the detail yet.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Thank you, Nessa. I note on page 100, you note that you don't consider that significant changes to the RPS natural hazard provisions are necessary to enable urban development at this time. I'm just aware that we have to do some changes to the RPS anyway for the urban development strategy and also potentially for AFTI. So would these changes to the natural hazards provisions be likely to be rolled up with that suite of changes that are coming through, or will it happen as a separate work stream?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Good question. Ideally, we would bundle them together, but we note that the project timeframes are very ambitious and quite tight deadlines, and they were looking for us to commence with the RPS change in August of this year, which we, didn't think was plausible, given we still have to do the consultation and meet the consultation requirements under the Act. So. Yeah, I think it could be essentially quite a discrete change, particularly focused on Appendix L and those technical requirements. And if that were the case, it could be bundled up with the urban growth, but I think it might even go ahead of that because, that the urban growth and the urban limits amendments still have a fair bit of work. And this is quite a discrete it's quite a discrete project in its own right. So it could be nicely handled as a discrete package separately if it needed to. But again, this is early stages. As I mentioned, we've still got a lot of work to do as a working group, a collective, and we'd still need to bring this back to councillors to have further discussion as we move forward.
Thank you, Nessa. Can you just remind us, please, of when you're proposing a further workshop on this matter?
Yes, so there was a June workshop. I think it was the 19th or it might be the 18th.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any further questions of Nessa or comments?
Question, please.
Councillor Clark.
Referencing sort of Awatarariki in mind, the implications of identifying natural hazards, particularly in zones that have already been built upon, has the environment planning gone into the consequences of that? I mean, it kind of the financial implications of identifying natural hazards on zones that have already been built on are actually quite frightening in terms of compensation. is the does this project actually take into account any consideration of that?
So one of the key reasons why this project has been initiated is in response to the challenges Tauranga City Council have encountered, in particular around trying to intensify development within existing urban limits, particularly around the coastal areas where they're susceptible to a number of hazards. And so that's essentially part of the reason why we've initiated this project. So a lot of thought has gone into that.
Nessa, one final question from me, and that is, how will this work feed into the stages of the new Smart Growth Spatial Plan? So there's to be a first draft apparently available by June of this year, and then by the end of the year, a comprehensive revised spatial plan. So where are the linkages in terms of making sure that the first draft plan really does flag these issues, and then we get greater detail?
With any large-scale land use change proposals, there is a requirement, and when I say large-scale, it's an area of 5 hectares or greater, and any large-scale development is required to have a natural hazards risk assessment undertaken. So for these areas, these future urban areas, whether they're around the periphery of the existing urban limits or their new assessments undertaken at some point in time to ensure that they're actually suitable and they can achieve a low level of risk to natural hazards. So there is a connect, but in terms of linking in with that project specifically, that probably hasn't happened at this point in time. They've been dealt with in isolation, but the team that are working in that urban future space are well aware of the RPS natural hazards requirements.
Okay, well, could I just make a plea that we are advised going forward how in fact this work will play into both the first draft of the spatial plan and then the subsequent one? That would be really good to actually understand, so that we've got confidence in the first draft of the spatial plan and then the second. So is that okay, Nessa?
Yes, and I do note that for the rural land supply study that TCC undertook, one of the key areas of the focus of that was around natural hazards, the areas of land and what natural hazards they were susceptible to and whether that was going to affect their viability. So a lot of these matters have already been considered for a lot of those areas that are being looked at for future urbanisation.
I'm just looking at a chat comment.
Through the chair, it's Namuta Potasi here. Just to add to Nessa's comments and just to let you know, and we can send you the relevant information too. In terms of feeding into AFTI, we have done a constraints layer of mapping, which is fed into the conversations we're having in the AFTI space. So I can send that to you as a separate email.
I also wonder whether we have got Mark Ivamy zoomed in, and he might want to elaborate further on, because I know there's been a lot of work done in natural hazards assessments within both the urban areas and urban growth areas. So sorry to put you on the spot there, Mark, but is that something you want to elaborate on?
No, he's just commented in the chat room that he has nothing further to add.
All right, thanks.
Well done, Mark. Okay, so councillors, any further questions?
Yes, one from me, Madam Chair, Te Taru.
Yes, Te Taru.
Yeah, just looking, Nessa, thank you, kia ora for your report. Hey, you're right, in implications for Māori, you've rightly identified undeveloped Māori land within the situation with the urban limits as providing some challenge. And you're looking at some research in that space. How are you looking to conduct that research, Nessa? Because it's a big issue for Māori undeveloped land, and keeping some open, some flexibility on the options for that in future years.
Yeah, sure. There's in the Western Bay Plenty sub-region, there is a collective called Te Araro Tangata that's specifically looking at trying to facilitate development of multiply owned Māori land, being well aware of the the barriers and the issues and the difficulties developing multiply owned Māori land, and they've got membership across the 3 councils and a number of the key agencies, including Te Puni Kōkiri and the like. And so part of that is actually, looking at natural hazards, recognizing that a lot of these pockets of undeveloped land within the urban limits are multiply owned Māori land, and they're still encountering the same issues that they have for many years.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Winters.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just by way of process, I mean, you've got your recommendation there on page 98 that we just received the report. However, the 2 recommendations there at the bottom of page 98, shouldn't that, by receiving the report, does that mean we agree with the 2 recommendations at the bottom of page 98? Or do they need to be stipulated in the recommendations rather than just receiving the report?
Namuta.
Sorry, through the chair, I'm just bringing up the relevant page. And Nessa, you might be able to comment on this.
I could jump in there, Namuta. Chris Ingle. I know that the Natural Hazards Planning Charter and these planning groups are staff level groups, so I guess that's why we didn't think we needed council resolution. We just wanted to update you on what we are doing, and particularly in terms of the possibility of an actual change to the RPS. But these things are probably more staff level matters that require
All right,
resolution.
Councillor Winters, are you prepared to move the recommendation?
Yep.
I second, Te Taru.
Thank you, Te Taru. Further debate and discussion? There being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against and carried. Councillor, this now ends the public section of our meeting. I will now move that we move to exclude the public from the next section of our meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor von Dadelsum. Just noting to any members of the public who may be still watching this, that we will now be stopping the live stream and conducting, and there's not much to conduct, I have to say, in the public excluded section of the meeting. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against and carried. We now